Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Wolverine Caucus. We are so excited that you're here to join us today. Do you realize this is the last forum of 2019? So for those of you who joined us throughout the year, we have appreciated your attendance, and we hope that you have been enriched by all of the information shared. As you know, the Wolverine Caucus is brought to you by the UM Alumni Association and the Office of the Vice President for Government Relations. Now, we are going to talk about health today, a very important topic that's helping a lot of people live longer, live better. We have one of the best speakers that could be brought from the university to talk about this important topic. Introducing her today would have been State Representative John Cherry. But as you know, the House is in heavy session to keep our government going, not our budget, which is important. So you may miss some of the legislators being here, but Representative Cherry is well represented by Mikaylah Heffernan, his chief aide, who is going to introduce our speaker. I think you're in for a treat, and certainly we're going to all learn a lot about being healthier and eating better. Mikaylah? Please join me in welcoming Mikaylah. Thank you.
I'm not a Wolverine at heart. I'll start that out. I know. Go Green.
We'll try.
Take it. My boss, however, is, as Veronica said, he can't join us. Session is currently ongoing, and hopefully we will get a state budget today. Yes, please clap for that. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Caroline Richardson on behalf of Rep. Cherry and the Wolverine Caucus. In addition to being our speaker for the day, Dr. Richardson is the Associate Chair of Research in the Department of Family Medicine and an active professor at the University of Michigan. Fantastic. She is a health services and implementation researcher with a focus on incorporating physical activity promotion into primary care clinical practice for individuals with chronic diseases. Those diseases do include diabetes, which we're all here to learn about today. Previously, Dr. Richardson was the director of the VA Diabetes Quality Enhancement Research Initiative. That is a national center that coordinates implementation research related to diabetes care and diabetes prevention at the VA. I believe Dr. Richardson received her BS from MIT and an MD from Harvard University, and was also a Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar at U of M in 2001. With that, give it up for Dr. Richardson.
Thank you. I'm going to be talking to you today about preventing and managing type 2 diabetes and some new things that have happened recently around that. I brought with me today also Grace Ling. She's our research dietitian. And she's helped me to develop a lot of the materials and the research projects that we're going to be talking about today. So I brought her in case we have any dietitian-specific questions. So without further ado, we'll go forward. Conflicts of interest are really a big deal these days in science. I just want to make sure you know what my conflicts are. I've asked lots of drug companies to give me money, and none of them have. But I do get research money from NIH, from the VA, from the University of Michigan internal grant funding, a small consulting firm that's looking at diabetes quality of care called Twine Consulting. Bigger companies like Apple and Dexcom have helped us fund our research. We get research devices from Abbott, and we'll be talking about some of their devices, but we do not get any money from them. Additionally, part of my salary is paid by the Annals of Family Medicine, Annals Inc., because I'm the editor-in-chief of that journal. So, I have no personal financial conflicts of interest with any of these companies. And as you'll see from my talk, I'm not a big fan of the pharmaceutical industries, and that's why they don't have me. So, type 2 diabetes, I just want to sort of set the stage for where we are right now in the United States with respect to type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is most diabetes. It's 95% of cases of diabetes. So when I say diabetes in this talk, for the rest of the talk, I'm talking about type 2 diabetes, obesity-related diabetes. And in Michigan, the Michigan-specific numbers broken out by age groups are listed on the slide. So between 18 and 44, there's about 3% of the population has type 2 diabetes. Over age 75, it creeps up to about 21%, but the highest prevalence is between age 65 and 74, where it's almost 23%. Overall, among all adults, it averages out to be about 10% of US adults right now. So it's a very common disease, especially as you get older. The real problem with diabetes is all the things that it causes. It's one of the major risk factors for heart disease. So if you have diabetes, your risk of developing heart disease is very, very high. Some would say close to 100%. It's the #1 cause of kidney failure in this country and need for dialysis. It's also, even in the VA, where amputation can be related to combat trauma, it's actually the #1 cause of amputation, lower extremity amputation, is diabetes. It's a major cause of blindness in this country. It's also a setup for a severe systemic infection and causes a lot of the people who are in the hospital with sepsis and infection to not do well, not recover, not respond to antibiotics because of their diabetes makes them immunocompromised, so they can't fight infection. So all these things mean that diabetes affects every specialty of medicine that we have. It affects the volume of patients we have to see in the emergency room and in the hospital, and it affects cost. In the flyer, it says there's a quote of an estimate of over $300 billion that the US spends managing diabetes. A more conservative estimate from the University of Michigan from Bill Herman was $237 billion in 2017, but somewhere around that area, it's a lot of money. The estimate is that about 1 in 4 healthcare dollars goes to treat the diabetes or its complications. So if you could imagine eliminating type 2 diabetes and having all those people who now have type 2 diabetes be healthy, we would cut the costs of medical care in this country by 25%. The care of a person with diabetes averages about $17,000 a year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm going to present 3 new trends in diabetes that I think is important to keep in mind and to know about if you're making policy decisions, if you're making your own health choices, if you're helping family members deal with illness. The first new idea, and this is the one that gets the most press and the most attention, is the most exciting at most of the big conferences, is that there's a new class of drugs to treat type 2 diabetes with. It's called the SGLT2 inhibitors. And you may not have heard of these drugs before because they're really quite new. The first one was FDA approved in the United States in 2013, but recently they've been in the news a lot because a bunch of big trials of these new drugs have finished and the results have been released. And the exciting thing about them is they actually seem to do a really good job of making people live longer and be healthier. They reduce the risk of bad heart events and heart failure quite substantially in patients with diabetes. And that is not true for a lot of the medications, even the expensive new ones that we use to treat diabetes. They haven't shown benefit of mortality. But the SGLT2 inhibitors, and there's a number of them, have actually shown benefit in terms of mortality. They keep people alive longer and they reduce their risk of getting hospitalized with heart failure. So that's exciting, and it's a substantial reduction. If you already have type 2 diabetes and you're at risk for a heart disease or heart failure because of it, these drugs can make you live longer, and that's great, and keep you out of the hospital. The bad news is they're expensive. By one estimate, it costs about $5,000 per year per person with diabetes to take these drugs. Of course, drugs have side effects. As a class, these drugs seem to have relatively manageable side effects, but nonetheless, they can cause problems. The way they work is by having your kidneys take the sugar out of your blood and excrete it in your urine. That results in a lot of infections in the urinary tract that you might have not had you not been taking the drug. But those are manageable, and they're not usually not life-threatening. But the big problem with all of these new drugs is the cost. So with that, that's basically the last thing I'm going to say about drugs. Because yes, they work, but they're very expensive. And given the number of people we need to manage, that has implications for policy and budget and for our healthcare system. So idea number 2 that I think we all need to remember, it's a new idea in some ways, but it's really a very old idea. It's about lifestyle, using lifestyle to manage type 2 diabetes. And I'm going to start by talking about a trial that used diet, exercise, and weight loss to manage type 2 diabetes in patients who were poorly controlled. This trial is sometimes called the Verta trial. It's a trial that was actually done by a company that I have no conflict of interest with. But they presented 2-year results, and this trial was published in June of 2019, so it's a very new result. But they had published 1-year results prior to that. The 2-year results continue to show very positive outcomes, and the trial was of a internet-mediated intervention for people with type 2 diabetes. They had an app that allowed them to communicate with a health coach, and they were taught to eat a healthy diet and to exercise through that coaching process. They lost weight, and they decreased the amount of medications they had to take because of it. It wasn't a small effect. And one of the reasons that the effect was so large is that the diet itself was a keto diet. And you may have heard about ketosis, dietary ketosis and keto diet. Some people think they're fad diets, and they come and they go, and there's a lot of confusion about what they are. But this particular company sells a product that involves using a keto diet in patients with type 2 diabetes that's poorly controlled, and they showed some really interesting outcomes. So among the outcomes, they showed pretty substantial weight loss, reduction in diabetes medication required to manage diabetes, improved glucose control, improved heart risk factors like blood pressure and cholesterol. But the most impressive result they had at 2 years, 53% of those patients with type 2 diabetes who had started the trial 2 years earlier no longer were taking diabetes medication. They were off all of their diabetes medication with the exception of a drug called metformin, which we use to treat people with prediabetes as well. So all of the expensive medications they no longer needed to take. And as I said, that's one of the reasons the drug companies don't like to give me money. But if you could imagine half of the people with diabetes right now no longer needing to take diabetes medication and not having any risk of high sugars in their blood, that's what the implications of this study are. It's really not been a thing to think about reversing diabetes. We don't think that's possible. But the Verta study shows that with the right diet, you can. And it doesn't mean that the patients in the Verta study who are no longer taking medication can eat whatever they want and stop exercising and sit in front of the TV and eat Oreos all day. They will get their diabetes back very quickly. So is it a cure? It depends on what you mean by a cure. But do they have all the risk factors that lead them to have heart disease, blindness, kidney failure? Those are gone. And they're not taking a whole bunch of expensive medicines to do it. So that's an impressive result. And we took the results of the Verta study and we thought about what we could do in our own clinics at the University of Michigan. And we started a trial at one of our family medicine clinics to help the type 2 diabetic patients who see us in family medicine at the University of Michigan manage their diabetes using a similar approach. And the big picture approach, a lot of people think keto diet is you eat steak and bacon and that's it. But it turns out that we don't really need to increase the fat intake for any of our patients. And they're already eating the steak and the bacon, and they already have plenty of fat in their diet. So in order to switch them to being keto, we don't actually have to increase the fat in their diet at all. In fact, we could even decrease the fat in their diet a little, and they'd still be able to do the keto diet, which is a high-fat diet. But the main key thing we need to do is remove all those processed carbohydrates. So in this slide, you see the donuts and the cookies and the sodas. Those are the things that are high carbohydrate load, high processed carbohydrate load dietary factors that lead to big spikes in glucose. Some other really important high glucose load foods are in the back of the room. The big tray of rice is a big load of carbohydrates as well. And then there's the brownies and the cookies and the lemonade over on the right side there. If you're eating those right now, your blood sugar is spiking. Whether you have diabetes or prediabetes or you have normal glycemia, that's what carbohydrates do to your blood. And our goal is not to replace those with steak and bacon, but to replace those with healthier vegetables like asparagus and celery and red bell peppers and broccoli and cauliflower. And still, people will be eating plenty of fat. We're not suggesting they cut down on their fat. There's some debate about whether they should be eating animal fat or plant fats, and plant fats include olive oil, nuts, and fish. Sometimes people will add in there. Avocado has a lot of fat in it. So there are ways to have a keto diet with a high-fat diet that's mostly plant-based, but traditionally the keto diet includes a lot of meat. But for our purposes of making people healthier, we really focused on taking these high carbohydrate load foods and switching them to low carbohydrate load vegetables. And here's a picture of different kinds of plates with keto, with low carbohydrate diets on it. And the ketogenic diet is 0 to 20 grams of carbohydrates a day, which is a very strict limit on carbohydrates a day, and includes the carbohydrates in vegetables. So a broccoli may have 1 or 2 grams of carbohydrates in it per cup, but no extra carbohydrates added to that. The more moderate low carbohydrate diets have 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per day, and then the most liberal, still calling it low carbohydrate, is 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. And for the Verda study, they used ketogenic, strict 0 to 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. For our study, we went with a more liberal approach with 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. So you could eat a little bit of carbohydrates, but not a lot, much less than the typical American diet, and no big plates of rice or cookies or brownies or lemonade. There's a book called Always Hungry, which you may have seen at the grocery store. It's pretty popular. It's written by a guy named David Ludwig, and he's a pediatric endocrinologist at Harvard. And he proposed this sort of more liberal, low carbohydrate, low processed sugar diet. And if you want to read more about it, I highly recommend that book as well. And that really is the book that we base a lot of our dietary interventions off of right now at the University of Michigan. So the second thing, besides low carbohydrate diets, that we do is we look at continuous glucose. We use continuous glucose monitoring. And I'm not going to ask any of you to disclose whether you have diabetes or not, but if you do, you know that sticking your finger and checking your blood sugar is part of your life. And the top picture here is a picture of somebody with a little drop of blood on their finger from having stuck their finger with a needle. They then put that blood on a sensor. The sensor tells them how much their blood sugar is right at that moment. In this case, the blood sugar is 57, which is a little on the low side. But what it doesn't tell you is what happened to get you to that 57. What has your blood sugar been over time? How did it change? How did your eating affect it? How did your exercise affect it? Just one snapshot in time. We've switched to using continuous glucose monitoring because it gives you a lot more information and an understanding of how the choices you make with food and the choices you make with physical activity change your blood glucose. So it's a continuous measure. It's a device there on the back of your arm, and it makes it very easy to find out what your blood sugar is. So this is just my iPhone, and I can scan the device, which is embedded in the back of my arm, and tell you that my blood sugar right now is 77, without any needles involved. Not only do I get it whenever I want it, but I can also get a continuous reading of it later if I can upload it to my computer. I can print it out and take it to my doctor, but it allows me to have a much more detailed information about how my blood sugar changed, even while I'm asleep at night, during the day, whatever. It's very easy to use. It's kind of like a Fitbit. Very easy to put on. It's made to put on by people at home, not by a doctor in the doctor's office, and it's relatively inexpensive. So the cost per day of continuous glucose monitoring in the new disruptive technology cheap CGMs is about $2.50 a day. That's about what it costs right now for people who are using test strips and needles and finger sticks 4 times a day. It's a little more than if you're only doing it once or twice a day, but it's in the same ballpark. It's a lot less expensive than the $5,000 new SGLT2 inhibitors. It's not a perfect continuous glucose monitor. There are some errors. It's not the most expensive kind. People with type 1 diabetes who have much more sensitive diabetes, but it's much more rare, tend to wear more complicated, more sophisticated, more accurate continuous glucose monitors. These are the quick and dirty cheap versions. They work well enough to help us manage type 2 diabetes safely, and they work well enough to help us teach people how to use diet and exercise to manage their sugar instead of drugs. The first to market of these cheap continuous glucose monitoring devices, which you can now buy at CVS with a prescription from your doctor for about $2.50 a day, is Abbott. Abbott came out with something called the Freestyle Libre, and that's what I have on my arm, and the app that I just used to show you my glucose. But there are literally hundreds of companies now coming out with new ways to measure glucose continuously, very cheaply and very accurately. And it will become something that's easy to do for people, whether they have diabetes, prediabetes, or normal glycemia. People will be wearing these continuous glucose monitors very soon. Many are already. A tiny little filament that goes into your skin. There is a very small needle that puts that in there. When you first put the device on your arm, you don't feel the needle because the pressure of the device is bigger than the pressure of the needle. Then you take the applicator off, and the device is quite small, fits under your jacket sleeve pretty well. The filament is a sensor. It is in the subcutaneous under the skin space, and it's sensing your glucose continuously and storing the data in the device itself, and that can be read by just about anything. So I want to tell you about a case study so you understand what the implications of the continuous glucose monitoring and the low carbohydrate diets are for people who have type 2 diabetes and are poorly controlled. And so I think the best way to do that is to show what it looks like for an individual who might be going through this. And this is one of a patient that we had in one of our trials. And he's a 57-year-old man who has depression, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and testosterone insufficiency. His weight is 326 pounds. BMI is 44, which is very high and dangerous. His A1C, which is a measure of diabetes control, is poorly controlled at 8.3. We want it to be under 6.5 or 7. He's on a lot of medicines, including long-acting insulins and a variety of other medications to help control his sugar, but his sugar is not well controlled. He's continuing to gain weight. And this is not a guy who isn't trying. He's already tried to cut out starch, but he didn't really know what starch was, so that didn't help him that much. He attends a high-intensity interval training class 3 times a week. So he's really working quite hard, but it's not working for him. And this is a typical story that we hear a lot from people with type 2 diabetes. I tried, it doesn't work for me. At night, during the day, he's often quite high in his sugar, but at night, he's often low. And that's disconcerting as well. You don't feel well when your sugar is low. You don't feel well when your sugar is high. He's all over the place, and nothing he does or nothing his primary care doctor was doing was helping him get this under control. He was continuing to gain weight, continuing to become insulin resistant, continuing to need more medication, and getting sicker and sicker. And we brought him in to talk to Grace, wear a continuous glucose monitor, and learn how to eat a low carbohydrate diet. And here's the first continuous glucose monitor tracing that he brought, after we first enrolled him. And what you can see, it's a little hard to know how to read a continuous glucose monitor strip if you're not trained to do it, but the basic idea here is that gray line, each row is 1 day, 24 hours. The gray line, the gray bar, is where your sugar should be. So if you're in the gray bar, you're good. If your tracing is over the gray bar, your sugar is high. If your tracing is below the gray bar, and here the red is below the gray bar, you're low. Okay, so he's high a lot, and he has these peaks right after he eats, where his sugar goes through the roof. And then at night, he's actually going low, which is what he complained about. If we look over at his diet that he tracked for us while he was wearing this continuous glucose monitor, he eats a Cliff Bar, orange juice, chicken noodle soup, an apple, trail mix, which includes some chocolate in it. He doesn't always eat dinner, but he does. When he does, he'll have peanut butter and celery or leftover stew, and then he eats it first because he's really hungry by the end of the day because he hasn't eaten much for dinner. He'll have a trail mix again, some milk, some blueberries. The total estimated grams of carbohydrates in his meal is not as bad as most Americans, but it's still 190 grams, way more than his carbohydrate tolerance will allow. So what you can also see here is these peaks are occurring after meals. He probably goes up to his peak level about 2 hours after a meal. That's called postprandial hyperglycemia, or after your meal high blood sugar. And you can see those peaks at every meal for him because every time he eats a bunch of carbohydrates, his sugar goes up. And then when he's at night, he's not eating, his sugar is low. His sugar is low because he's over-medicated with insulin and other drugs. And at night when he's not eating, he has too much medicine on board. So we brought him in, he talked to Grace, he went through a curriculum around what makes your sugar go up, what are carbohydrates, how do you figure out what carbohydrates are in your diet, how to cut them out. How do you read nutrition labels to learn whether a new food has carbohydrates in it or not? Plan to try and get his carb load down to under 100 grams a day. Start with a low carbohydrate breakfast, which is hard. Breakfast is the hardest meal to be low carbohydrate because we're so used to eating it as a carbohydrate load, whether it's cereal or toast or orange juice, that's all carbohydrates, pure carbohydrates with nothing else. So we got him onto a low carbohydrate breakfast and had him consistently eat breakfast and encouraged him to take his medication regularly and at the same time every day. He came in on his second CGM, this is what he showed. So again, remember, the tracing in the gray bar is in the range that we're trying to get him into. And you can see the difference. He no longer has those big spikes of glucose right after his meals because he's eating a lower carbohydrate diet. Not a keto diet, not a strict low carbohydrate diet, but a more moderate low carbohydrate diet. And you can see that he still has a few days where he's low at night. And when we first taught him the low carbohydrate diet, we told him you're not going to need as much medication. And we cut some of his medication down on that first visit. The second visit, he's still going low at night. We cut his diabetes medication further. So we're taking him off medicine, lower doses, removing pills, removing injections. And you can see what some of the things he started eating that he hadn't been eating before: omelets, string cheese. He took the chocolate out of his trail mix so that it would be mostly nuts, which is okay for him. Celery and hummus or peanut butter. Still going to his high intensity interval training exercise class, but he's now eating cauliflower rice instead of high carbohydrate rice, and 2 cups of blueberries and milk at night for his snack. Third follow-up, 6 weeks after his first appointment, he's no complaints of hypoglycemia. He's reduced his long-acting insulin quite a bit. His fasting glucose is in the 90s, which is excellent. His weight is already down 10 pounds. And his new A1C, hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of diabetes control, is 5.8, down from 8.3. Wow. That's not even in the diabetes range anymore. That's at the bottom of the pre-diabetes range. So he did that by decreasing his insulin load, decreasing his medications, changing his diet. He feels better. He's not hypoglycemic during the night. He's not hyperglycemic during the day. He has more energy and he's losing weight. So that's an example of what this looks like. One of the reasons this works so well is when you eat this way and you have a more stable glucose, you don't have the carbohydrate cravings or the postprandial fatigue that made you run and grab a bag of potato chips or a cookie or a soda in the middle of the day. So he was no longer feeling like he needed to go take a nap at 2 p.m. after lunch. And he had decreased hunger and binging afterwards. So that's one of the reasons these low carbohydrate diets work. So we took about 500 patients who were poorly controlled with type 2 diabetes at the University of Michigan. We randomized them into the control and intervention arm, and we put them through this program. And we're still in the process of getting those results back, but we have some preliminary 6-month results, which we have high levels of patient satisfaction. They like the diet, they feel good about it. Some of them liked it so much that after the trial after we'd given them their sensors for a few sessions and taught them, they started paying out of pocket for their own CGM so they could continue to monitor their glucose afterwards. Significantly improved blood glucose control, decreases in diabetes medication across the board, and significant weight loss. Here's a graph of how much the A1C changed, and just to remind you that our case study patient went from 8.3 to 5.8 in 6 weeks. That's a really dramatic improvement in diabetes status. But these guys, the red bar is no change. Anything to the right of the red bar is actually the A1C increase. So not everybody improved, but most of the people did improve. So the left side is all the people that did improve, and some of them improved really dramatically. But the average improvement in A1C was about 1 point drop in A1C, and that has significant implications for long-term health outcomes, mortality, and protecting your oxygen from the ravages of diabetes. So that's a good result. So low carbohydrate diets for type 2 diabetes is really not just a fad. It's shown such good results in so many different settings at this point. There's over 100 now randomized controlled trials showing that low carbohydrate diets can really improve outcomes, improve weight loss, and improve glucose control compared to the traditional low fat diet that we've been selling for the last 40 years. There has been some resistance in the scientific community to studying low carbohydrate diets, and not much gets funded at NIH around low carbohydrate diets, so non-traditional forms of funding research have been used for much of this research. However, that's starting to change. The American Diabetes Association released new standards in 2019 that included the fact that research indicates that low carbohydrate eating plans may result in improved glycemia and have the potential to reduce anti-hyperglycemic medications for individuals with type 2 diabetes. So they're agreeing that the research is pretty convincing and that maybe we should start thinking about this more. And in conjunction with the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, there's a new joint position statement about using low carbohydrate diets as part of the medical nutrition therapy for adults with type 2 diabetes. They all say, a caveat, different people are different. We need to personalize the diet, figure out the right carbohydrate target for each person. The continuous glucose monitoring helps us do that because it helps us understand exactly what is your sugar doing in response to that bite of food you just took, not what's the average. So I have one more new idea I want to get across before I'm done, and that's the idea of prevention. It's all well and good to treat type 2 diabetes when you have it. I mean, it's great that we have these new drugs. It's great that we have diet and exercise that maybe can possibly prevent, reverse diabetes. But it turns out that type 2 diabetes is preventable. And just like every time someone dies of the flu, we think, why didn't you get a flu shot? Every time someone dies of colon cancer, we think, why didn't you get your colonoscopy? We should really be thinking that way about type 2 diabetes, because every time someone gets type 2 diabetes, it's not just bad luck. It's actually a failure of our healthcare system and our public health system to prevent a preventable disease. In 2002, in the New England Journal of Medicine, a group published a paper showing that in a very large $26 million national trial, that about 60% of type 2 diabetes can be prevented with relatively modest diet and exercise modifications, much less intensive than what we just talked about. And since that time, there's been a lot of work put into disseminating the diabetes prevention program for people who have prediabetes, not yet diabetic, but on the way. There's a program that can help you learn how to change your diet and how to exercise so that you don't get diabetes. And that has been a struggle since 2002. It's now 2019, and we're 17 years out from the published trial, and people are still getting diabetes left and right. Our incidence we'll talk about the incidence in one next slide, but our prevalence is still quite high, and it's been a long, tough road to try and get diabetes prevention to actually happen. It's hard to get people to join the program, to participate in the program, but if they do well. And it's ramping up slowly. Organizations like the YMCA have partnered with the ADA and with the CDC to try and disseminate it more broadly, but it's still not getting to all the people that need it. So here's a slide. It's a little bit complicated to read, but there's two lines on here. One's incidence and one's prevalence of diabetes. So incidence is new cases of diabetes. Prevalence is the number of diabetes patients in the population right now. And you can see the blue line going up, so we get more and more total number of people with diabetes in the population. Up around 2009, the blue line starts to plateau a little bit, so we're not increasing our rates of type 2 diabetes quite as rapidly as we were. That's good. The reason we're not increasing quite as rapidly as we were is the key to that is in the red line. That's the incident diabetes cases, or new cases of diabetes that are coming, that people are getting newly diagnosed. And you can see that the rate of new diagnosis of diabetes is actually declining for several years in a row now. So population level decline in incident type 2 diabetes is really exciting. We love that we're able to see that, but it's still not quite having the impact on our healthcare system that we think it has. We've started to see little hits, but we really haven't realized the full benefit at a population level of what diabetes prevention could look like. But we're starting to see some benefits 17 years out. So given that, we decided to take our diet, our low carbohydrate diet, and our continuous glucose monitoring and apply it to people with pre-diabetes and see if we could use it to prevent diabetes. And I have a case study of one of the patients in our pre-diabetes study. This is a 56-year-old woman who is pre-diabetes, not yet diabetic. She had a high carbohydrate diet, ate a lot of processed food. She was a busy lady, worked full time. And her pre-diabetes BMI, that's a measure of her weight, was 32.8, which is in the obese range. She was on medications, Lipitor for her cholesterol, but nothing for diabetes because she didn't have diabetes. She's pre-diabetic. And she had some migraines. So that was her story, and we brought her in and we put a CGM on her, and this is what we found. And this is the tracing from one day before we taught her to eat a low carbohydrate diet. And what we showed her was that when you eat your high carbohydrate meal, your sugar spikes up into the high range, and then after 2 hours, it crashes and you go low, and you feel bad. She's not crashing because she has too much insulin, exogenous insulin that we prescribe. She's not on any diabetes medications. This is her own body reacting to the high carbohydrate load, generating insulin from her pancreas, from her native beta cells that make insulin in her pancreas. In response to that high carbohydrate load, it's sort of an overreaction of her pancreas with too much insulin, pushing the glucose low 2 hours after she eats. And she also reported to us that she was feeling hunger, fatigue, and cravings 2 hours later. And then it made her want to eat again, another high carbohydrate load. So we showed her some ways to stop eating, and she said, before I started the study, I ate out of boredom. I rarely ate because I was hungry. I never let myself get hungry. It didn't matter how much sleep I got the night before. Every day after lunch, I became so tired and found that I needed caffeine to make it through the rest of the day. That's that postprandial crash. During the study, I found that wearing the CGM and reviewing reports kept me mindful of what I was eating and helped me understand why my body reacted the way it does after eating. So she was able to learn from the CGM and from the instructions that she got about eating a low carbohydrate diet. And following the study, even after we were done with her, she was committed to eating a lower carbohydrate diet. She no longer feels tired during the day. Her pre-study hemoglobin A1C was 6.4, which is in the pre-diabetes range, just about to creep up into the diabetes range, which is at 6.5. But after the study, her estimated A1C based on her CGM was 5%, so down into the normal range, not pre-diabetic anymore. And that was after just a few weeks. So this is sort of my concluding slide. Will low carbohydrate diets and continuous glucose monitoring transform the way we manage type 2 diabetes and prediabetes in family medicine, general practice medicine in general? Maybe. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. It may not be for everyone. There's questions about sustainability. How long does this last? Are there unintended consequences of eating a low carbohydrate diet? Who's paying for all this training and intervention? But I think it's a promising direction to move in. I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a question. So you spoke about vegetables. How does the sugar in fruits impact our bodies?
Yeah, so fruits have different amounts of sugar in them. There are some very high sugar foods, and there are some very low sugar foods. Bananas, mangoes, and pineapples are some of the higher sugar fruits. Blueberries and strawberries are some of the lower sugar fruits. Apples somewhere in the middle towards the high, depending on which kind of apple you eat, towards higher rates of sugar. That sugar is sugar. It's fructose, it's not sucrose, but it's basically the same thing. It's a carbohydrate. It's rapidly metabolized. It makes you spike. If you have diabetes or you're carbohydrate intolerant with prediabetes, eating fruit, lots of it, will make your sugar go up. And it will cause the same bad outcomes of any regular sugar. Does that mean you can't eat any fruit? Different people can tolerate different amounts of fruit and different kinds of fruit. In low carbohydrate eating, we tend to emphasize the berries, the blueberries, and strawberries, which are lower in carbohydrates and moderate amounts. Even tomatoes, which are technically fruit, have a fair amount of sugar in them, and limiting them to modest amounts rather than an overwhelming amount. People who eat 3 or 4 bananas a day and 2 apples a day are going to have problems with their carbohydrates. We just aren't made to be able to metabolize that amount of carbohydrates. Although, if you're a marathon runner, you're probably fine.
Is bread basically a no-no, or can you mitigate the impact by having like whole grain breads? I'm begging here.
Breads are a huge problem for most people with carbohydrate intolerance, whether it's prediabetes or diabetes. And most people, even normal glycemic people who haven't made it to prediabetes yet, so normal, when they eat a piece of bread, their sugar spikes for most people. Not for everyone. Like I said, if you're a marathon runner, you're good. But for most people, it's a problem. And whole wheat bread does have a lower spike, but not much. And it just depends on how much you're exercising, how much of the bread you're eating, what else you're eating with it, whether you can tolerate it or not without having a big reaction.
I have a question. And you may not have a big answer, but I just wanted your thoughts on this. Okay, recently I read about studies looking at particularly African Americans and keto diets and these low carb or low fat diets. And one of the conclusions suggested that with environmental stressors, mental illness and depression and daily stress, a lot of these keto diets for low carbs or the other diets that are low fat don't have the same positive impact necessarily because you're fighting against all these other stressors. So my question is, does depression and stress affect how the body processes sugars or create insulin resistance in any way? Where is it on relating these I say environmental because things out in the world affect you. You create your stress or create your depression. So can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I don't know the study you're referring to, but I can imagine what it looks like. So there's a couple of caveats in interpreting those kinds of studies that I would want to know. One is, it takes some time to train your body to work off of fat as a fuel. And often those studies are very short term, as in 24 hours. And if you're looking at outcomes in 24 hours or 48 hours, then a keto diet looks pretty bad in everyone. So one question you should ask yourself when you go back and look at that study is, did they actually try the keto diet in African Americans in a low-income community? Did they actually follow it out for a while? And I would bet they didn't. But if they did, the next question that comes up is, does depression and stress make it harder for you to adhere to or change your dietary behaviors? And there's no question about that, it does, of course, it does. If you're busy just trying to survive and pay your rent and not become homeless and take care of your grandkids whose mom was just incarcerated, it's harder to spend the time you need to do to plan your meals and to get out and go for a walk. There's no question about that kind of level of dietary stress causing real problems with making dietary change. Having said all that, if you have a choice between a low carbohydrate diet or a low fat diet and you're diabetic in that situation, the data suggests that you should try the low carbohydrate diet, that you'll be more likely to succeed. It also helps with the cravings as well. I will say that I see patients myself as a primary care doctor in a clinic, a low-income, primarily African-American clinic in Ypsilanti, which is near Ann Arbor. And my patients often can't afford their insulin. So I don't know if you've heard all the stuff in the paper about how expensive insulin is, but the price is insane. And often $1,000 out of pocket. After insurance pays their part, there's still $1,000 you have to pay a month to cover your insulin when you're on a lot of it. And people can't afford it. And I have patients coming into my office all the time saying, I don't have $1,000 to pay for my insulin. I guess I'm just going to die of diabetes. And I say, you know what? If you don't eat carbohydrates, you don't need that insulin. And they're pretty motivated by that. And I give them this book, the Always Hungry book, and they read it, and they're able to understand it. And they stop eating carbohydrates, and they feel better, and they start losing weight, and they don't need the insulin. And it works for them. Not for everyone, but I've certainly had plenty of very impressive successes.
And so does in reducing the carbs, did it relieve some stress, or relieve some depression? I mean, you know,
It's certainly
all
most
those chemicals in your body that heal itself in those ways?
Most people who on a lower carbohydrate diet feel like they have more energy. And people who are hyperglycemic feel like they don't have much energy. So giving somebody a little more energy helps them deal with day-to-day challenges. And helps them want to get up and go for a walk, helps them have the energy to plan a meal, and to deal with their other problems as well. Most people experience that. Not everyone, but most people.
Thank you.
In the midst of we're talking about sugar, people aren't aware that sugar and cocaine hit the same pleasure zone. So America's basically on cocaine and cell phones. Where does that leave these people?
There's a really interesting book that I highly recommend everybody reads. It's called The Hacking of the American Mind, and it makes that neurochemical connection between opiates and sugar.
And cell
Pretty
phones.
convincingly.
Cell phones,
It's the
sugar,
dopamine.
and cocaine hit the same pleasure zones, and it came right out of this. Yes, they do.
It's true.
We're all
Where do artificial sweeteners fall into all this?
There's some controversy about that. I honestly, I don't know the answer, and I don't think anyone does, but there are certainly some case studies of people who were using artificial sweeteners and not succeeding in controlling their glucose, stopped the artificial sweeteners and started to do better. But we don't understand fully the science of it. There are some sweeteners that are thought to be better than others, it's
Trick your tongue, but not your pancreas.
yes, exactly. You said it exactly right.
What was it she said?
She said it tricks your tongue, so it tastes sweet, but it doesn't trick your pancreas. So your pancreas doesn't make the insulin. So,
I'm a cautionary tale. I did not, and I'm here as the guest of someone who paid attention to my Facebook post when I said I am a cautionary tale. If you can't be a good example, be a cautionary tale. Because I did not pay attention when I was told I was pre-diabetic. First of all, I thought, oh, diabetes, blah, blah, blah. It's not that bad because, you know, everybody's got diabetes, big deal. And I have several other chronic illnesses, and I thought, oh, I just can't deal with another thing. Well, guess what? Now I have to deal with another thing. And I now know that diabetes is pretty damn serious. So if you are told you are pre-diabetic, please pay attention to me. Diabetes is a droopy drain, you don't want it. And anybody who wants to know, I am wearing my CGM right at this moment. And if you want to see what it looks like and my little monitor thing, see me after, I'm happy to show you. Because people ask me about my little meter all the time. And I should be on the freestyle payroll because I tell everybody it's the best invention since electricity. Because I wasn't poking my finger several times a day because I'm not real compliant. And so this is now much better for me. I know what's going on with my blood, with my glucose numbers. And I'm a better diabetic than I was before. So first of all, don't get it. Second of all, if you have it, come and see me and find out about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's-
I've heard that corn and potatoes are a preferable substitute to bread when managing diabetes. Is that like a myth or is that reality?
If you're really insulin resistant, if you're really carbohydrate intolerant, potatoes and corn will not be something that you want to eat. They will spike your blood sugar. How much corn you can eat and how much potatoes you can eat depends on how insulin resistant you are and how glucose intolerant you are. The difference between bread and potatoes and corn, you know, it's a subtle difference and you may be able to tolerate it, especially if you're a marathon runner. But if you're not and you're struggling with your blood sugar, potatoes and corn are likely not something you want to eat very much of at all.
I have 3 questions. Somewhat of a follow-up on the sugar, or the other sweeteners. What about stevia as far as being a more natural sugar? Is that still spiking my glucose or no?
Yes, stevia and monk fruit are the 2 sweeteners that have been tested and theoretically in most people don't cause a spike in blood sugar, but there are exceptions. And I would say we don't have 100% the answer on that, although stevia and monk fruit are the ones that generally on the low carb forms people say they're using without getting their sugar to spike.
Great.
That's like the state of our
That's-
research right now, is
That's good.
the Facebook forum on it.
Okay, number 2, bread. What about, I've heard sourdough is a much better bread to use than any of the others. Is that so?
So, again, going back to the potatoes and corn issue, the issue with potatoes and corn is that they tend to have fiber along with the carbohydrates.
Right.
And that slows down the absorption of the carbohydrates, which is a good thing. To the extent that your bread has fiber in it, and that may mean that it's whole grain, or it may mean that it has some bacterial remnants from the sourdough starter, whatever, to the extent that it has something that's slowing down the absorption of the pure carbohydrate load that you just ate, that's probably going to be a little bit better. Would I consume loaves of sourdough bread if I had type 2 diabetes? Probably not. And probably you're going to see some effect on your blood sugar with it.
Okay. And my third is, how do we obtain a copy of the keto diet that U of M uses?
Like I said, we really follow the Always Hungry book. Costs about $12 now on Amazon.
And that has a guide in it?
That has, the first half of it explains what happens to your insulin when you eat sugar and why that makes you gain weight and why that makes you insulin resistant. And the second half is all recipes. David Ludwig, who's the author of that book, also has a very extensive website with lots more recipes on it. He's published a second book called Always Delicious, which has even more recipes in it. So if you really want to see sort of the state-of-the-art diet that's well developed and easy to access with excellent, not too difficult to make recipes that are lower in carbohydrates, I would go straight to David Ludwig's website for Always Hungry. And get his book.
Hello, I have a question on like starches such as green peas or even some of your grains. I was told by a doctor like to avoid a lot of your said green peas that have a lot of starch in that, in turn goes to sugar, which affects inflammation. Along with that, like vegetables such as carrots, how do those compare to like your fruits which have sugar?
Yeah. So excellent question, and you're not alone in asking that question. I actually recently presented to our physician residents in family medicine department, and one of the physician residents was just furious with me. She's like, if I can get my patient to eat a carrot, I'm getting them to eat a carrot. But the truth is a carrot is a root vegetable, it's full of starch. And if you're trying to cut your carbohydrates, a carrot is not the way to go. Get them to eat broccoli, get them to eat cauliflower. If they're the only thing they're gonna eat other than a candy bar is a carrot, fine, eat a carrot. It's better than a candy bar. But it's not low carbohydrate. So you're right. And peas are the same. Small amounts of peas are fine. Large amounts of peas have a fairly high glucose load, and that's metabolized relatively quickly. They also come with fiber and they come with protein, so it's not as bad as a candy bar or a piece of bread.
Are they better than like your fruits that you mentioned previously?
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah. Yes, thank you.
In any of the organizations or programs that you mentioned, is there any work being done in the youth community? Because my kids have free lunch every day at school, apples, bananas, Nutri-Grain bars, Pop-Tarts, juice. So how are we're working on the prevention, but how are we gonna cancel out the next generation coming up?
That's another brilliant question. And I have a 13-year-old who's in school right now, and the things that he eats drive me nuts. But I think there's a couple of things to know about that. One is that actually the obesity rates in kids is going down. Like we're more effective and more successful in our interventions for obesity and our public health interventions and our school-based interventions for obesity in schools than we are for adults. In fact, many of my colleagues who I've been working with for 25 years doing diabetes research in adults have switched to kids because they're like, I give up on adults, I'm switching to kids, I can do something with them. First of all, we control what they eat because we decide what they buy, and so it's a little bit easier to make something happen. So we are seeing some benefits. Schools are doing a better job of feeding healthy foods to the kids, but kids do like carbohydrates and it's hard. And there is a downside of restricting sweet foods and sodas from kids that makes them want it more. So there's behavioral issues around children and restriction of food that's very complicated. It's one of the reasons I didn't switch to kids. But I would say we're having some successes and we're getting better at it. And there's a lot more work to be done with that. But the kids are learning. They are starting to be exposed to the ideas of what healthy foods are, and they're getting a better background in it. There was recently a pediatrician who recommended low carbohydrate diets for children in Australia. He was arrested and charged with committing malpractice and was in jail for a while. He's out now. But there's a lot of resistance to doing sort of things that the traditional medical community doesn't consider a healthy diet in children and pregnant women. And we have a fair way to go with that as well.
You mentioned fiber a moment ago. What's the effect of high fiber foods?
Well, if you talk about food that is sort of in its natural state, picked off the vine or whatever, it tends to have a mixture of fiber and sugar in a fiber matrix. If you juice an apple, you take the sugar out and you leave the fiber matrix behind, and you drink the juice, you get all the sugar and none of the fiber. But it's pretty clear that if you eat the apple with the fiber intact, not juicing it, that fiber slows down the absorption and metabolism of the sugar, and it slows down that spike in glucose. So eating food like carrots, which may have a fair amount of carbohydrates in them, but within the fiber matrix, versus carrot juice, it's going to be better for your sugar profile than when you get rid of all the fiber.
How does the always hungry diet that you follow, how does that compare to the DASH and the Mediterranean diet?
That's another great question. So the cardiologists are pretty adamant that a low carbohydrate, high fat diet will kill you in your sleep with a heart attack. And if we have patients with diabetes, there's a lot of description of low carbohydrate diets. That's good if you have diabetes. But if you have heart disease or hypertension, you should be on the DASH diet. So it turns out they're the same people, right?
Yeah, sounds like.
So what are we gonna do? Do we give them the DASH diet half the day and the diabetes diet half the other? I mean, this doesn't make any sense at all. It's the same people. It's all of us. We're all at risk for heart disease. It's the #1 killer in this country. And so what are we supposed to tell people? We don't know, honestly. One of the people who invented the DASH diet did some research on low carbohydrate alternatives to the DASH diet, and he thinks that actually the DASH diet might not be the best thing for heart disease, but we don't know. Honestly, we don't know. I'm a co-investigator on a very large trial at the University of Michigan going on right now, and it's a head-to-head comparison of the DASH diet to a keto diet in patients who have both heart disease, hypertension, and diabetes. And we will see. We will find out. We're enrolling about 250 patients with both hypertension and diabetes, and we're randomizing them. Some of them, half of them are getting the DASH diet, half of them are getting a keto diet. We'll see where that goes, both in terms of managing their hypertension and in terms of managing their glucose. But we do not know the answer to that. The reason we got funded is because the guy who invented the DASH diet wrote us a letter and said, I think they might be right. This might actually be better than the DASH diet, so let's do the trial.
Wow.
When will that trial finish?
It's about halfway over, so maybe next year sometime.
So where does this leave vegetarians and vegans?
You can do a low carbohydrate vegetarian or vegan diet. As I said, nuts, olive oil, and avocados are high fat foods. It's possible, it's very restrictive. It's difficult. You can certainly do it if you add in fish and if you add in dairy products. It's not so hard at all, and eggs make it even easier. If you want to restrict it just no red meat, it becomes easier and easier as you go down that road. A strict vegan diet that's low carbohydrate is possible, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Because you have to eat enough fat to be able to have enough energy to get through the day on the fat burn.
Thank you.
Has it been prepared? Dr. Richardson, we could listen to you all day. Yeah, not only does she talk about the innovations like the freestyle or about ways that people are finding to manage the disease, but also she talked about ways that can be prevented. So certainly we are enlightened. This presentation will be available online very soon, as well as it will be available in slides for those who are interested. On behalf of the Wolverine Caucus, we want to give you this gold pin. And also thank you, Grace Lee, for joining us. And thank all of you for being a delightful audience, for supporting the Wolverine Caucus this year. And we certainly wish you a wonderful autumn and great weather. And go blue! Go blue!